to our PSB presentation. I am Ella Lane, Canada.
Max Bidevold, Norway.
Álvaro Rebollero, Spain.
Buhaka, Kingsbridgeton.
Thomas Murray, Mountain Coon.
Our history inquiry. As this was our first inquiry, we were building up the pressure on ourselves, and we're not expecting the effort that was needed. One thing that I needed to hear before we started was to not freak about the outcome when you're halfway through. That, my friend, is only necessary when you have an hour left and were half asleep when you wrote your conclusion. I'm afraid to say I'm subject to that. I even had a little bit about all the animals that died in the fire. Always triple check, you never know.
In this process, I learned that lots of risk-taking was required. In this inquiry, I took all sorts of risks, such as taking the risk of starting a whole new theme 1 hour before submission. So a hard thing to accept in this inquiry is that risk-taking does not always come out how you want it to. That's the biggest thing I learned in this process. However, there were also lots of positives during this process, like the time when I turned in my piece of work. Very proud of what I had done.
Geography. My geography inquiry, being the second inquiry I did, I was a little more confident, but I still needed a lot of help. After receiving it back after it had been marked, I was not unhappy with my score, but I still felt that I should have done better. In the end, I learned that the key to upgrading and improving is good feedback from your peers.
When I started my geography inquiry, I was so much more confident with it compared to my history. We used loads of collaboration and communication, especially with the collecting of data. On one of the days we had already finishing collecting data, we went into our groups to do some activities. In one of them, all of us had to put blindfolds on, and we have to follow a road, and when you found a tree, you will tell the others. This sounds silly, but when you lose one of your 5 senses, trust is key. We found a lot about each other for work and as friends, but the most important thing that I have learned about this is to not give up in the middle of the process of doing my inquiry.
Our RS inquiry. In this inquiry, we started with a lot more experience, and we got to choose our topic, which boosted morale. We learned a lot more about ourselves and how we look, which will be key in later parts of life. I was writing about a subject that I was passionate about, and at first I seemed to fly through. However, near the end, whether I was ahead or on time, I would slow down and not work as hard, therefore slipping back, and I fell behind. If I kept the same amount of effort persistent, then I would be able to stick to a strict timetable and be able to write much less. I used bucket loads of independence, and in fact, I should have used less. I should have used my vehicle. From that inquiry, I have learned I need to use my resources, and that I need to use collaboration and communication when I'm doing group work. But I still need to use independence in that time.
What went well for me in the RS inquiry was that I was really confident when I handed it in. Although in the beginning, it was the opposite, because I had not written much shorter text before, so I had absolutely no idea what to do or how to do it. And although I was quite confident, I need to plan my work more to have more ideas towards the ending. And I also need to spend more free time on it. I want to be ahead, not behind.
Our learning powers. Learning the powers are so important, not just in school, but in work and in life. So what are the learning powers, and how have we used them? We are showing reflection at this very moment in this presentation, and we're showing many others. But in the inquiries, we showed an amazing amount. Collaboration. Collaboration has been essential in our geography inquiry, whereas in our history and RS, they were slightly less. In geography, we were put into random groups and were sat with people we may not ordinarily choose. And we were just set to work. We quickly found each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I found, personally, that when Boo tells you the current is fast and the river is deep, you need to trust the facts. We united, and by combining strengths and working through weaknesses, we became an efficient and much more accurate data collecting team.
Communication. Communication is a part of cognition, and it's essential in the life of work, and also, for example, to get friends. It's especially important in a group project like the one we've been doing for the past couple of weeks, because there's no way we would be as confident as we are standing here if we had not been communicating to plan and upgrade the project.
Independence. The power of being independent is to act for and by oneself. How can you be more independent? You have to be at the right time, at the right place, with the right kid. My favorite independence quote is, "The hardest work is walking alone, but it's also the work that makes you the strongest." And how have I used independence in my inquiries? For example, in my geography and RS, I use my preps and free time independently.
Grit. In our inquiries, we needed a lot of grit, which stands for guts, resilience, initiative, and tenacity. Grit was absolutely vital when writing our inquiries. When writing got tough, we kept on going. When we were completely soaked, hair and all, because you didn't listen to your teammates, and your estimation of how deep the river is was completely wrong, we kept on going.
Risk-taking. Risk-taking was one of the most important learning powers. So what is risk-taking? Risk-taking is the ability to have the courage to take a risk outside of your comfort zone. This is because, without risk-taking, you have aimless goals, because at some point in your life, you must take a risk.
What have we learned about learning?
I have learned that learning is a repetitive process. You have to go back over and over your work and do 1, 2, 3, maybe even 7 drafts. Constant improvement of your work. In my inquiries, I failed to do this, and now I've learned from that mistake. I've also learned that personally, learning is a collaborative process. I work better with others, and I think that is one of the reasons I needed so much help when writing inquiries.
I have learned some tips for future inquiries and also for life. You can always be better than you were if you struggle to be. You can, but I have learned 2 things that are most important. Quality better than quantity, and don't do more than you can, because you will be in your panic zone and you will do it bad.
I have learned that the learning powers are extremely important to learn effectively. And I've also learned that I'm extremely good at forgetting things. So I have to go over things many times. And it may be similar for many people, but I might have to go over it even more. You should also, when you're learning, you should make it fun, because at least I have much better stickability if I do. You should also help yourself, so if you learn better in a group, learn in a group. If you don't learn better in a group, don't learn in a group.
What have we learned about ourselves as learners? And we have learned that there are different types of learning: visually, auditory, and kinesthetic, or VAKLs for short. I am a kinesthetic learner, which means I like to do things hands-on, and I like to use a computer to reinforce learning through the sense of touch. Even though I'm kinesthetic, it is so much more effective to use all 3. Depending on what learning style you find easiest, you can have different things while you work, and you can have different things in later parts of life. For instance, if you're a kinesthetic learner, like me or Boo, you tend to find sport a little easier, or you find that while you learn, you may be drawing or doodling. The way I found that I was a kinesthetic learner was by acting out a battle, and I found I remembered it so much more than just in a lesson.
I am mainly a visual, but also an auditory learner, and I have found that I prefer watching videos and documentaries over things like drawing. But although I'm mostly visual and auditory, using all 3 visual, auditory and kinesthetic is more effective than using only 1 or 2.
I am mainly a visual learner, but also an auditory learner. And about myself, I have learned that I have to research before doing my planning, because it's going to be easy in the writing part. I realized this when I did it in my RS, and I had better structure than my history.
I have learned that I am a visual and auditory learner. I like to watch videos and documentaries to learn. This consists of hearing, listening, and seeing. I am not a kinesthetic learner, because I do not like to learn by acting things out.
Reflecting on our learning powers. What learning powers have we made most progress in?
I have made most progress in risk-taking and massive progress in independence. Independence because it was the main learning power in our inquiries, as we had to do lots of independent research to achieve our final grades. Independence was most important because we had to research ourselves. We did not know what stage everyone else was on. This made it very difficult because I did not know if I was behind or ahead. However, by doing this, I have become a much more better independent learner.
I think I've made progress in grit and independence. I prefer to work with others and to learn collaboratively, and therefore I think when writing our inquiries, I made progress in independence. I found that writing the inquiry is quite hard for me, and because of that, I feel I've made progress in grit.
I feel I have had masses of progress in my independence and risk taking. At first, I thought that independence was just working on your own, but really, it's taking yourself out of crowded or group environments and using the time you have really well, being able to produce something at the end that you're really proud of. And I thought that risk taking was just taking a small, unneeded risk. But really, it is taking a big risk that you're really unsure of. If it does work, it will improve your inquiry so much more. You should always try and put your best foot forward and put your all into it. And if it doesn't work, well, at least you now know for its future. What learning powers do you find challenging?
I'm not going to lie. When Mr. Atherton told us to do a self-reflection in our history inquiry, I thought that it was not going to be useful because in Spain I have never done that before. This is the reason why it was very challenging for me. But now, after doing the 3 inquiries, I know that is the most important part of this process.
For me, risk-taking, grit and reflection were the most challenging learning powers because I haven't really worked on them before. And although I haven't worked on independence before, Mr. Atherton has helped me understand it in a really good way. And communication and collaboration are things I've done all the time in Norway and here.
What learning powers do you still have to improve?
The learning power that I still have to improve is risk-taking. I've improved risk-taking a lot in history because if I had the choice to choose a topic in this inquiry, I would choose a really easy one. And when I did my hours, I chose a difficult one, taking a risk. But I think that I can improve this learning power a bit more because sometimes I prefer to do the easiest thing.
I feel that the learning power I need to improve on most is reflection and the part of independence. In independence, I feel I can work on my own really well and take myself out of that environment. But I still need to work on the part where I individualise my work from others so that it will stand out more and I can gain more marks. I always feel like I can always feel like I can work on reflection as I always focus on other learning powers before them. We also all need to improve on grit. Grit is a very difficult learning power to take control of. This is also because it is basically 4 learning powers. This takes you out of your comfort zone and takes you into a struggle zone. So you're learning, but you're really trying. It makes you do things that you may not necessarily want to do. For instance, not doing something fun and really knuckling down and doing something and working instead. We find that grit is one of the most important learning powers. What could be done in our next inquiry? In my next inquiry, I feel like I should set a strict timetable and keep the same amount of effort constant. I should always reflect on it once it is done and take notes, slightly like this, so I can look back on my next inquiry and find my weaknesses. I hope to be able to eliminate weaknesses and polish my inquiry techniques and timetables.
As I said, I need to plan my work more, and I also need to use more free time on future inquiries, and possibly also use that free time to find useful information, so I don't find things I already know. I also need to proofread more carefully and check for spelling mistakes, because I made a few in my RS. I should also use more pictures and diagrams to support my ideas.
In my next inquiry, I will try to make a balanced argument and at the same time try to compare and contrast my topic. But most importantly, I will try to use better terminology.
In my next inquiry, I think I should work more in my free time. I did work in my free time, but I feel that I should work harder in my own time that I dedicated to writing inquiries. Also, in a future inquiry, I have learned that I need to use more independence to get the work done on my own instead of asking others for help.
In my next inquiry, I would like to focus more on my main theme than smaller details. Maybe I would like to focus more on grit and risk-taking on my next inquiry, because it is very important in my learning power process to be gritty, so I never give up, I never turn my back. Risk taking would be more important because whenever I take a risk, it's very likely to pay off.